The Navy SEALs have an operation where they drop a person in the middle of nowhere and their mission is to find their way back to base. Well, I'm going to have a little bit of fun with that exercise today. I'm at Mildura Airport at Hangar 31 and my task for the day is to jump in that thing, fly to an unknown destination and find my way back to Melbourne. The only thing I know is that I've got a Jeep waiting on the other side and I've got about 8 hours worth of driving in front of me. Let's see how I go.
As you might tell, this isn't your average road test. I've been asked to go bush by drive editor Andrew McLean, finding my way back home without any form of technological assistance. But before the day begins, let's backtrack a little. Our journey actually starts the previous day with a flight from Sydney to Mildura. From this point, all I'm told is that I need to front back at Mildura Airport at 6 AM the following morning for a mystery charter flight. Taking one last look at my watch before the blindfold goes on, the time reads 6:35 AM. The journey takes about 25 minutes in what feels to be an easterly direction. And then it all sinks in. With some help from the pilot, I gingerly step off the plane and take off the blindfold.
Whoa. Okay. Here we are.
The earth is a scorched outback red. Vegetation is mostly limited to low-lying trees and paddock stubble, and there is no civilization in sight. Just a dry airstrip and a windsock.
And this is where the real adventure begins. My schoolboy maths tells me that we've flown about 100 kilometres east from Mildura. Behind me is the weapon of choice. It's the Jeep Cherokee Blackhawk edition, and its mission today is simply to get us back to Melbourne. However it is we get there, I really don't know.
The first thought that comes to mind is to call the boss to ask just what he's got me into. But there's no phone service, so that's no help. So I decide to navigate the old-fashioned way. Go ask for directions.
Okay, that's probably the first clue and the first decision I've got to make, left or right. I guess I'll, I don't know.
We eventually discover a national park office revealing we're at Lake Mungo, a 110,000 hectare national park located in far southwest New South Wales. The site is steeped in archaeological history, most famously for remains found in the late 60s and early 70s, widely considered to be the oldest in modern human history.
Now you take a look around and the landscape itself is really arid. But it's hard to imagine 60,000 years ago this place would have been teeming with water and all sorts of different wildlife. But as the world's changed, this has turned into a really dry and desolate sort of environment. Nothing like what it used to be, but even so it's a really beautiful place, and we are in a bit of a rush to get home, but you can't not stop and just take time out just to look at this place. It's really interesting, even just to learn about the Aboriginal culture here, even something as simple as time. They used to use the stars and the different wildlife to measure different times of the year. We do things very differently now, but it's cool to appreciate that sort of stuff while you're out here.
After some brief sightseeing and a few run-ins with the local wildlife that dominate these parts, we find our way onto a dirt track that looks to be roughly in the right direction to Melbourne, when we're dealt another major issue.
So we're now about an hour into our trip south. Basically I've got my bearings a little bit better, and I know that we've got to go towards Euston, and from there we can get back onto Sealed Road and make our way back to Melbourne. But there is another problem that we didn't really account for at the start, and that's fuel. This car had about 140 kilometres worth of range to begin with. Now we're down to 73 kilometres, and we've still got at least another 80 kilometres ahead. So let's hope by being a little bit more efficient, and I've done that just by turning the aircon off and leaving all the windows up, sitting about 80 kilometres an hour instead of going a bit faster. Hopefully by doing that, we can see our way through to Euston, fuel up, and then jump on the highway from there and go straight to Melbourne.
Despite the situation, the drive is an enjoyable one, taking in some beautiful scenery within one of the state's major wheat and canola belts.
Now basically the Blackhawk edition gets a few extra cosmetic features over the regular longitude Cherokee. So it's not exactly the model that you'd pick if you were doing 4x4 stuff all the time. Those sort of attributes really belong to the Trailhawk variant that's also offered in the lineup. But even so, this car's got 4x4, it's got different terrain modes that are designed to help you get you out of trouble. On these sort of dirt roads with lots of corrugations, the vehicles perform fairly well. There's a lot of vibration coming through the cabin, but I think that would be the same no matter which vehicle you were in. It's definitely the right sort of vehicle to be in when you're in one of these situations. Just the bigger issue at the moment is just fuel. The 3.6 litre V6 is a little bit thirsty. It's got plenty of power, but enjoys a bit of a drink. So it's just a case of monitoring that and hoping we make it back to Euston.
Our day then reaches a key intersection, literally. Faced with an ailing fuel gauge and no supplies, do we follow the sign to Mildura, forcing a detour and potentially missing our flight, or do we take the more direct route home to Euston and run a much higher risk of running out of fuel? Against everything our heads tell us, we decide to run the gauntlet.
So we're making progress. We've finally hit the bitumen again and we're edging closer ever so slowly to Euston. But on the fuel watch, it's not looking great. We're still not quite sure whether we're going to make it in. Basically the fuel range meter went from a numerical thing where it told us how many kilometres we had to empty, and then it got to 50 kilometres till empty and just went to low, just a default sort of setting, which is pretty ironic because if anything that's really the sort of situation where you want to know exactly how many kilometres you've got to empty. So from that point on I looked at the odometer to see how many we had left, and we're sort of tracking all right. We're 50-50 on whether we get into Euston or not. I just hope that the trip meter itself is a little bit pessimistic and that we do get there with a bit of fuel to spare.
The gamble eventually pays off. We limp into Euston for a refuel and for our next set of directions.
With our fuel issue now solved, we can pretty much just make easy progress down towards Melbourne. Stopped in at a couple of corner stores and asked for directions. I still don't want to do anything with the phone or nav or whatever else, so doing it the old school way. And yeah, we're making our way down now through to Swan Hill and then from there to Bendigo and back through to Melbourne. So slowly getting there. But I guess this sort of driving really illustrates just how multi-dimensional the SUV has become. I mean, so many people buy these sort of vehicles and use them for the school runs and that's about it. But you sort of forget that with something even like the Jeep that we're driving, you have got the ability to go anywhere and do anything, but you just sometimes forget that.
After hours of highway driving, we arrive at Melbourne Airport just on sunset, and it feels terrific. The Jeep is fully intact and we learn that we can get a slightly later flight back to Sydney.
Wow, 700 kilometres later and we've now arrived at our final destination here at Melbourne Airport. You know what? We did it without maps, without phones, just word of mouth and just a little bit of common sense. It's been a fantastic day. We've had a little bit of everything really, from crazy dirt roads, wild animals, to even that small issue of running out of fuel. We got unlost and we've had a great time doing so.